thank you very much, Larry and Pepper Center, for inviting me here.
And the Institute.
And the Institute, and the distinguished people in this audience, many of them. The two that I know very well are Larry and Jill Codogno and Larry Polivka, who are treasures them in their own rights in terms of protecting these issues, these programs, and have a huge presence and platform in the country on that, outside of Florida, but in Florida too. I'm going to start. I had this really lovely opportunity before this to talk with a sociology class, and it was interesting. I started by saying, how many of you know who Claude Pepper is? There's a class of about 100 people, and there were about 3 hands that went up. And so I spent a few minutes talking about, I sort of worked that slide into the presentation just to get a feel for that. Because those of us who had the opportunity to meet him, read about him, benefit from him, know what he is and know what his legacy is, and that we all do better because he was there and he worked so hard for his entire life. And as someone of courage, what I particularly respect about Senator Pepper was his support of civil rights legislation in the late 40s. It cost him a senatorial seat, but that was the kind of courage and decency that this man represented, and his notion of thinking about what have I done to lighten the burden of those who are suffering. He lived decently. He was the kindest guy, nice sense of humor, and very human, and very effective. And I didn't realize that he was on Time magazine twice. I remember the '83 one, but because he was the powerhouse that really protected Social Security when there was an effort to pull it, to basically go into it and create huge cuts in Social Security in the name of addressing what was a crisis, but was a relatively modest crisis. He was the thorn in the side, frankly, of the Reagan administration, whether you like Ronald Reagan or not. There's a quote in this Time magazine story about, it says, there are 2 people who get from one of the White House aides, 2 people get under the president's skin, Tip O'Neill and Claude Pepper. So, now being a strong Democrat, I view that as a real honor. But I want to respect that people have different views. So here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to try to allow time for discussion, be informal, but also present a view of what we built with Social Security, why we built it, and why I think it's pretty darn good, and why it works for us well. But then ask, what happened? How did we get from a place where really politicians, Democrats and Republicans, were broadly supportive of the system to a place today where the system is very fundamentally threatened? At the point in time that it's most needed, it's threatened. At the point of time we most need champions, we don't have our Claude Pepper. In this coalition I work with, people talk about what we need is a Claude Pepper, by the way. That's what this is said so many times. My response is, well, we're not going to have a Claude Pepper. We may have, to be honest, let's say a Ted Deutsch. Congressman Deutsch may emerge there. We may have a Bernie Sanders. We do have a Tom Harkin. We do have people who, we do have a Mark Begich, a moderate Democrat from Alaska. People who stand out. You'll never have another Claude Pepper, but you may have some wonderful people. We do have people who are very significant in advancing of the system. Barbara Mikulski, who really defends it very strongly. But we don't have a Claude Pepper, and we never will have another one. But what happened? That Democrats seem to have moved away from the system some. Republicans almost universally are critical of it today. Many moderate Democrats are. It's almost a badge of courage. The badge of courage in today's politics is to say, we've got to cut these programs. I'm a heroic politician because I'm willing to touch the third rail. Well, that's great if doing that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense. And we'll talk about that. So how it got that way and what it is that we can do to turn it around. I'll also save time. I think I don't talk as explicitly about the sequester today, but more about the framing, how we got there. But I think we're going to want to talk about very much what's at stake and what might be happening in Washington and what we can all do about it. So we talk about Social Security as something that's been built by generations. It's something that is a critical system. It serves all of us. It's like our military, it's like our highway system. You really can't imagine life without it. It's fundamental to our society. And so fundamental, we sometimes, like our highways, we just assume they're there. To the bridge, whatever, but it's like our highways. It's the foundation of our retirement system, it's the foundation of our disability and our life insurance protection for kids. Generations have built this program by their contributions, by the political courage of Republicans and Democrats in moving the program forward. Even in 1982, the minority leader of the House, I guess I'm getting old, whose name is escaping me, he was very supportive of the program, had a different view. In 1982, nobody was talking about pulling the system apart or coming up with ideas of how we could privatize. Nothing was acceptable. The idea of privatizing means testing was outside the boundary of discussion then. So we have this system. We built it. And we built it for a reason. We built it because it's one of the most significant ways we can provide broad protection against risks we all face in a wage-based society. All of us are at risk of losing wages when we retire, if we are disabled, or of leaving a family without income if we die. We know private investment is important, but we also know, as we found in 2008, those who didn't know, it's risky. And we also know we have a reason to secure the dignity of families through this mechanism. So we built this system, and I'm going to just suggest it's extraordinarily popular. The public, I want to wander, but the public supports this system. You ask people, and they will say, especially the young, I don't think it'll be there for me. I don't think it's there. They don't have confidence in it. But I just asked the kids in this audience, I said, how many of you think Social Security would be there? I said, be honest. I think about maybe 5-6% of them raised their hands. And most of them said no, or didn't raise their hands. And I said, that's consistent with what the polls tell us. I also asked them, how many of you think, are supportive of it so that it's there for your parents and your grandparents? And then a lot of hands went up. Even though you don't think it'll be there. I said, well, that's actually how young people think. The young people do not believe it'll be there if asked, and not given good information. And they also support the system because they know. And I joke with them. I said, yeah, you don't want your boomerang parents moving in on you. Hi, kids. I'm here. My benefits have been cut and I need you. But also, in fact, this is one of the few systems Americans are willing to pay for and pay more. There's a new poll that was just released by the National Academy of Social Insurance. The short story is 4 out of 5 people who were interviewed say benefits are too low, we support this system, and we're willing to pay more for it so that it provides benefits for today's and also future generations. They use the poll, and they put packages together. The bottom line is, it's supportive. We know that. We know outside of Washington, outside of media elites, and there are many media and people in Washington who are supportive, but outside of the Beltway, Americans understand what it is. And they understand what it is for good reasons. I'll pass these around, and it's kind of fun to look at. I'll need a couple of them back, not all of them. Here's one in Spanish, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid work for Florida, and here two in English. We put this out in our coalition once a year to serve as a basis for press meetings, basis for meetings with members who want to release it, members of Congress. But The bottom line is this system works. Americans know that, and there's good reason. Almost 4 million people in Florida receive benefits each and every month. They didn't have to worry about whether they would receive benefits as the economy nearly collapsed. They received it. When the World Trade Center collapsed, within a few days, within a month, nearly all the survivors received their benefits. The system really works. There are 2.8 million retired workers in Florida, roughly. 2.8 million, 500,000 people with disabilities, 300,000 widows and widowers, 250,000 children. 1 in 5 people in Florida receive the benefit, and there's a huge resource. It's a huge resource that flows into the Florida economy and usually helps stimulate local businesses. It's the healthcare system too, some, I suppose. But it stimulates localities, local businesses and localities. It's about 7% of this state's GDP, gross domestic product. It's a hugely important program. It's the one system we have that provides core protection, certainly to, and again, we're looking at 2010 dollars here, but that's pretty good. Households with less than $33,000 on the aggregate income going to them is about 70%, 75% of their income is coming from Social Security. Even households that are better off, and we don't think of rich people being rich, $58,000, a huge portion of that income comes from Social Security, and the highest income people like me, I'm 67 almost, and I work. Now, I'm a job away perhaps from being in the next rank, but higher income people, it's important. But the key thing is it really is a system that works and is critical, and it's something that Americans believe in for very good reason. And yet today, all of a sudden, this remarkable institution is very challenged. Its benefits, as we mentioned, are modest, just $14,800. I guess I want to say one thing. It's not just the numbers that count, though. Behind the system are people. Every one of the 56, 55 million people are individuals, families, our cousins, our sisters, ourselves, whatever, who receive these benefits. In our report, you'll see a story about Susan Pritchard and her husband Harvey. They're featured in our report in Florida. We try to personalize each of these reports some. She describes her husband and herself as military brats. They took care of themselves. They were trained to do that. But she became blind. They both had their earnings. She became blind. Her husband became fully disabled. And they live on their Social Security and their Medicare. That's core. That's their life. Critically important. She says, I like these programs because people who become disabled or who are old enough to receive them have contributed into these systems. I contributed. It's something I take with dignity. They're a necessity. I praise Jesus for these programs. Now, I'm not here as a preacher. I'm Jewish, but this is what she says. Okay? Maybe I praise Jehovah. But and we have a report, 40% of veterans receive Social Security. It's a core protection. 35% of all people who receive Social Security benefits are veterans. How many here are veterans? I'm just curious. Well, this is an unusual room, but it's a huge system, and the stories are huge. It's the core life insurance for many people. This is a story about a family whose husband died in Iraq, in a military helicopter crash. This is the system that allows her to maintain life regularly. When asked what a difference a lower Social Security benefit would make, Vivian says, we've had to cut back on groceries. Social Security keeps the children's lifestyle, what their daddy would have wanted for them, buying their own school supplies, playing sports like Little League, continuing the karate and music the children love. I would even cut back on groceries to keep from giving those back. They miss their daddy. He attended their games, and he did karate. It keeps them busy, so they don't cry every night. And it helps me also to see the children enjoying life again. This is what all the political talk in Washington doesn't catch. I'm going to say it. We talk about the numbers, it's unfair, whatever. We don't talk about Amelia Montgomery and her husband Dabney, a Tuskegee Airman, who, I'll pass this around. This is really an interesting report that we put out. Dabney Montgomery was a Tuskegee Airman. He was awarded a congressional medal, the Congressional Gold Medal for his service, not the Medal of Honor, but a gold medal that all the Tuskegee Airmen were awarded. He came back from the military and he wasn't allowed to vote, so he got involved in civil rights. He was a bodyguard for Martin Luther King in the March on Selma. He was a social worker. He spent his life working in housing and doing different things. He had some money saved up. He was given bad financial advice. His wife, Amelia, is 19 years younger than him. And Amelia, their money was, the extra money they had was gone, but they have their Social Security. As he put it, that's why we were able to fix our roof the other day when he talked about it. It's 70% of their income now. So this is the heart of the story. And I guess that's what I want to emphasize is this isn't just about numbers. This is about real people. And also, so here we are. Today we're in a different world. We have a system that works. We have a system that Francis Perkins and Franklin Roosevelt built. We have a system that has protections that generations of politicians put together and that Claude Pepper and others championed, the vision, the idea of Social Security. But we have all this resistance to it at the same time. It doesn't matter that this institution has met all of its obligations in good times and bad. There are those who like to falsely claim it's in crisis. It's always in crisis. Create a crisis. It's unsustainable. They want to build the case to cut the cost of living adjustments, to raise retirement age, and to reduce core benefit protections, and even radically dismantle the system. It doesn't matter that the system's not in crisis. It gets thrown into the federal deficit debate. It doesn't matter that the system has nothing to do with the federal debt. It gets insinuated into the debate. And we have Alan Simpson, former Senator Simpson, and we have we have former Senator Simpson, and we have Mr. Bowles, Erskine Bowles, who are feted by the press as courageous because they're putting out a proposal to substantially cut Social Security, and they're the moderates today. Now, I wonder if you remember this, Jill. I often talk about Alan Simpson. I remember in that meeting where I think he's a vituperative jerk. He's a bully. He's the classroom bully. He's funny. I mean, he really has a sense of humor. I can laugh at some of the things he says, but he's a nasty bully. I remember in the 94 commission when Simpson was a member of it, he was sitting there and he went, and I'm waiting for when those old people come, when those AARP lobbyists come with their neck veins bulging. I can't wait to tell them where to go. Do you remember that? Yeah. This is what we have decided is a hero today. This is a guy who also sent a nasty letter to a 28-year-old lawyer and basically said, well, I'll go on Simpson. I basically said that Social Security's become like a cow. He also said she didn't know her math because women don't know math. He and Larry Summers, I guess, feel that. But that Social Security has become like a cow. The U.S. has become like a cow with 310 million udders. Actually, he used a different word, and it wasn't the polite word teats. But it began with T and it had another T in it, and it ended with S. That this gets away, and he doesn't get pushed off of his role as co-chair of this deficit commission. And once again, this week he reemerges with a courageous proposal to fix Social Security. How do we get there? How do we get there when the country faces a very serious an imminent retirement income crisis that we don't even talk about thinking of addressing it as a nation, because people in their mid-50s are going to be moving into retirement in very difficult circumstances. We're going to watch that, and people in their 40s, but we're not talking about it. How is it that even though the cost of living adjustment that seniors and people with disability gets understate inflation, understate the effects of inflation on senior and people with disabilities incomes, that somehow Washington is interested in something called the chain CPI, which would reduce annual cost of living adjustments and would mean that if you live, the longer you live, the less you would get relative to what you were supposed to get. And how do we get from this situation where Social Security doesn't contribute a penny to the federal deficit, that it's been allowed to be insinuated into that? That's really what I want to focus most of the rest of my remarks on. And I guess, but I want to begin it with this quote by Eisenhower, which I think is so wonderful. And should any political party, and he was a plain-spoken man, should any political party attempt to abolish Social Security, unemployment insurance, and eliminate labor laws and farm programs, you would not hear from that party again in our political history. World's changed. There's a tiny splinter group, of course, that believes you can do these things. Among them are H.L. Hunt, you know, possibly his background. A few other Texas oil men, and an occasional politician or businessman from other areas. Their number is negligible, and they are stupid. That's President Eisenhower, a moderate Republican from the 50s, speaking. Yet today, we're in a position where most Republicans are actively interested in dramatically cutting the system. We have a president who's a good president, but who Larry has once referred to, and I think quite properly, as, in many ways, a moderate like President Eisenhower. It's a different context, but his politics is not radical politics or even liberal politics. Very moderate position he takes. We have a president, a Democrat, who hasn't embraced the system. He will say some of the right things, but he keeps putting cuts on the table instead of talking about the system in terms of the values that relate so well to his core ideas of all of us being in it together. How does this happen? I'm going to suggest along the way a number of things have happened. The easy votes came to an end. Martha Durthick, a really very esteemed political scientist, wrote in 1979, actually taking from Al Ullman, who was the chair of the Ways and Means Committee back then. She wrote, "The easy votes on Social Security have come to an end because, as Al Ullman pointed out and others, the system had matured. It was a hard set of votes that were going to be coming. It's a lot easier to give things away than it is to contain the growth of a system, even though that growth was expected and wanted." But by the mid-70s, we had financing problems driven by an economy and a mistake in a formula in Social Security. They had to de-distribute. They had to make some changes that actually cut benefits. Hard vote. They did it again in 1983. I remember Claude Pepper was a member of that commission, and I had just the honor of watching him. Tell you a Claude Pepper story. One of the things, I was staffed to the Democrats, and three of us were staffing Democrats, who were staffed to Republicans. The Republicans would argue Social Security actuaries are making assumptions that are far too liberal. They're assuming that there's going to be a lot of immigration. They're assuming that the economy isn't going to grow. They're assuming that life expectancy will go to the moon. Betty Deskin, who was the staff person on our side who did this. So we're sitting in Mr. Pepper's office, and Senator Pepper is listening with Bob. The members were Bob Dole, Pat Moynihan, Martha Keyes, and Lane Kirkland, head of the AFL-CIO. And Betty's describing that there's this professor, he says, well, what about this life expectancy? I don't get this. And I don't do a real good Claude Pepper imitation. Ms. Duskin, could you explain this, please? He said, well, Senator, there's this Professor James Fries, and he says that there's a limit to how long human beings can live. We're going to live better. We're going to live long. We're going to live healthier. It's called the compression of morbidity. We're going to live, but that there's a finite number of years that we can expect in the human life cycle. Life course. And he's, Ms. Duskin, can you tell me about this? And who is this Professor Fries? What does he say? Now, this was really him. Now, he was wonderful. But he goes, well, he said, how long will he live? And he goes, well, he's saying probably, 89, 90 is about as long on, that the typical human will live to. And he goes, who is this Professor, Ms. Duskin? And she explains again. He said, I don't think we want, dead serious, we don't want to pursue this line of argumentation, says the 83-year-old Claude Pepper, who happened to die, I think, at 89 or 88. But he emanated concern, and he had the respect, and he was able to keep the Democrats' feet to the fire, as well as the Republicans. It's because of him that the outcomes were better. Because the Democrats always had to worry, would Claude Pepper go along with this? Because if they wouldn't, he brought huge numbers of people. He was the man at that time who raised the most money for the Democratic Party, was the most sought-after speaker for political fundraisers. So the easy votes came to an end. On top of that, there were real financing concerns that start being important. Other groups get involved in the policy arena. This is increasingly an area that is not just done by technical people. Right after the 1983 amendment, something Larry and Jill know and others know, there was this article in the Cato Institute Journal that said, it was called a Leninist approach to Social Security reform. Cato is a conservative journal, conservative think tank, a libertarian think tank. They've been very critical in moving the idea of privatizing Social Security. The article basically said, we need to work to build a case against Social Security so that we can move major changes, privatizing it, shrinking it. And here's what you do. Tell people 55 and over. Have you ever heard this before, Ben? Then tell people 55 and over, don't worry, your benefits will not be touched. Tell people under 55, the system doesn't work. You gotta worry. It doesn't work and you're not getting your money's worth. Throw everything you can at it. Align with groups that have an interest in changing the system, the financial industry, build constituencies, and build the case for moving towards privatization. That, in effect, was the strategy that was put into play, slowly, not in a monolithic, conspiratorial way, but in many ways it unfolded. Stuart Butler, who wrote that article with Peter Germanis, Stuart was the vice president of Heritage for many years. Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank that's very influential, and he's still, I believe, at Heritage. So this strategy comes along, and they work on it. And they work on developing the arguments. Us liberals were busy saying, we're talking percents of taxable income. Don't worry, we can deal with this shortfall in the future if there is one. We talk percents of taxable income or what percentage of people get benefits, like I just did. They talked about the idea if you earn money, you ought to be able to keep it. That you ought to have your own savings, that you'll do better putting it away in the bank. They built a set of arguments around values, and we're still talking about technical things. I think that was part of our fault. We didn't talk about the value base of this system, the idea that this system really gives expression to values held in most of our religions, caring for our parents, having an obligations for our neighbors, the idea that you have a sense of responsibility not only to your family, yourself, you're supposed to work, and you're supposed to get something for it, personal responsibility. We didn't talk that. We talked a different language, a technical language, and I think it cost us a lot. Meanwhile, they're throwing, I'm trying to just tell this more as a story, they're throwing everything they can at it. Social Security is unfair, generational inequity. Those young people back then who were baby boomers to some extent, it was unfair to them because those old people back then were getting benefits they never paid for, supposedly. Heard that argument again. They threw the argument that it was unfair to higher income people because high income people didn't get as great a rate of return on Social Security as low income people. But it was also unfair to low income people because we didn't end all poverty with Social Security. Unfair to women, unfair to African Americans, Hispanics, all those things were thrown. That had an impact, and it was used, and it's been used again, but that didn't do it either. Then we went through this period where very successfully, and Jill and I witnessed this, the word entitlement was turned from an 11-letter word into a 4-letter word. Entitlement, and I'm more inclined increasingly to say, but everybody uses this word today. The 1994-95 Bipartisan Commission on Entitlement and Tax Reform in many ways marketed this idea. Jill has a great article in The Gerontologist that talks about it. Larry's written about it in different ways. But entitlement was turned into a negative because people like Social Security. They like Medicare, but they don't like entitlements. They frame it as an entitlement. Throw the Social Security shortfall in with the healthcare problems, ignore the fact that the huge healthcare problems we face have to do mainly with not having adequate control over the private healthcare sector. It certainly involves some population aging, but not very significant. The president this past week misframed that past week or so. Population aging is not the concern that's driving our healthcare system. Ignore the fact that in some ways Medicare and Medicaid are solutions to the shortfall because they operate far more efficiently than the private sector. Throw it all together, say the problem is entitlement spending. That worked some. And talk about entitlements. Now the interesting thing about entitlements is the polling that's done. So Linda Lake did some polling a couple of years ago and asked people different ages, what do they think about entitlements? And here's the story. They didn't like them. Then they asked, is Social Security an entitlement? Oh, no, I contributed into that system. Medicare, no, I contributed into it. Even Medicaid came off pretty well. But it's been a good marketing opportunity. It's infused the language. My own view is we ought to be saying, you're damn straight it's an entitlement. We contributed into it for ourselves and for our children and our grandchildren, and stop the silliness. It is, and it should be an entitlement. But there's a value frame that was thrown on it. The notion of unsustainability, the notion of privatization comes along. George Bush decides to use his capital to privatize. Actually, Bill Clinton had a deal with Speaker Gingrich going to insert a privatization into Social Security as part of a grand bargain. This notion of grand bargains was around. Do you know why we didn't get it through Bill Clinton? Monica Lewinsky derailed the negotiations that had gone on, and that Erskine Bowles, who is the chair of the Deficit Commission that President Obama set up, Erskine Bowles was negotiating for President Clinton. So they threw it all out, and then, eureka, I say, they found the budget problem. Call Social Security a part of a cause of the federal deficit. Throw it in there. It's not true. By law, it cannot borrow a penny. Not a penny. But throw it in there anyway and say it is the cause of a problem. Now, they tried that, and a lot of groups pushed back with real information. Social Security doesn't borrow money. It has nothing to do with the federal debt. And it is not a cause of our deficits. And they backed up. This is the Bowles Commission and others saying, yeah, I guess you're right. It has nothing to do with the federal debt. But we ought to fix it anyway and do it while we're dealing with the federal debt. So throw it in. And that's still where we are. It's been used by the president as a negotiating chip, putting forth cuts. The cost of living adjustment cuts that have been put forth have effectively been a chip trying to get the Republicans to give something on taxes. And it's been used, I would say, it's been mistakenly used and sadly used, because we should be embracing this system. The president certainly should, to build, and Larry makes this point, to build his political base. This is a core system, not just for today's old, but for everyone who's moving along. So that's what happens. And we get from this, through this White House, beginning in 2009, a series of efforts to put Social Security on the table. Larry Summers, then the economic advisor to the president, and former president of Harvard, who had to resign when he said, women just don't have skills in math, parallel to men. I mean, really effectively, a brilliant economist. Larry Summers begins by talking about, let's have a real quick victory right out of the box. We'll privatize social, we'll not privatize, sorry. We'll have a grand bargain. Some cuts, some revenues, we'll fix Social Security, and we'll go forward. We'll just get a whole backdoor agreement. That fell through. Interesting, the president, how many of you know who Pete Peterson is? Who was given $1 billion to pull apart core social programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I'd put it that way. He was the keynote speaker for the president's fiscal summit that the president set up in 2009 in February, I believe. He was originally supposed to be keynote speaker. He was pulled off because Speaker Pelosi, as a result of advocacy a number of us were involved in. As a result, I was not involved. And that's the reason this happened. The White House had to back down on that. They had their fiscal summit and they wanted to get Social Security on the agenda. There have been so many efforts to put Social Security out there. We talk about it as whack-a-mole. There are efforts, the basic pattern has been, let's set up, if you can't do this in the daylight. Outside of Washington, the American people like this system. They understand it. They want to maintain it. They're even willing to pay more for it. Inside, it seems, somehow it's a problem. It's not a solution to risks that people face. It's a problem. And the only way you can fix it is having a backroom deal. The idea really, in some ways, emerges with the Entitlements Commission. It didn't come into fruition, but what Bob Kerrey wanted in an Entitlements Commission, he was the Democratic co-chair of it. Originally, he wanted to have legislative authority or an agreement from the president that if the commission reached agreement, the president would put forward a package based on the commission. That didn't happen. Then Senators Conrad and Judd start proposing it again early in 2010. Then it goes on and on. This keeps coming up. It's been successfully pushed back, and the risk we face is maybe a shade less, but it's there. And there are a number of things that are very significantly at risk. What's at stake? The cost of living adjustment, which is a very significant cut. In spite of what they say, it's not a technical adjustment. It's a way to cut benefits. It means for someone who, say, turns 65 today, if they reach 75, they lose about $480 in that 75th year. If they reach 85, they lose about $1,000, a little less. If they reach 95, $1,500 relative to what they would have get. $20,000, $30,000 over the life of someone. If you're a person with disability at age 30 and you're on the Social Security for many years, it's additive and it's huge. The idea of raising the retirement age is very much back and alive. We have, in fact, already cut Social Security benefits for our young. Anyone born after 1960, after 1959, has already sustained about a 25% cut in their benefits from the 1983 legislation. Every year you raise retirement age is about a 7% cut in benefits. The taxation of Social Security benefits reduces benefits more the further you go out, and there was a little COLA change back then. So we've already trimmed, and we have a very modest Social Security system relative to other nations. If you look at U.S. replacement rates, what Social Security replaces, it's well below the typical industrial nation. But they want to raise that retirement age. It's only natural. Well, again, you talk about it as just a technical fix for people living longer, but what it is a 7% cut, no matter when you take the benefit, for each year you raise the so-called normal age or full retirement age. Then there's Bowles-Simpson's other proposal, which is most destructive, which turns Social Security effectively into a flat benefit over time, dramatically cutting the system and really doing what those who had proposed means testing were never able to do successfully. Huge set of changes. Then you get all these, today, privatization light, I call it. We're going to cut Social Security, we'll do this, we'll do that, and then we'll add some kind of savings component on top of it or beside, as if somehow that's going to solve the problem. So that's at stake. And what can we do? I'm going to suggest there are a number of things we can do. That we have to hold our politicians responsible. We have to keep their feet to the fire. We have politicians who ran just a few months ago saying they will not cut benefits. They can't get away with saying changing the COLA isn't a benefit cut. It's just a technical fix. It's critically important to hold that. The writing of members of Congress, the writing to and writing also letters about is very important. Calling in the radio, signing petitions, basically making noise. What they're afraid of is noise from their district. That is the critical thing. They don't care. The key thing a member has to watch for is the support they're going to have in the next election. And they actually listen. And in fact, it's the language, it's the pressure that's come from outside of Washington in district meetings that has really held the line on this. So we can't stop doing that. If there is legislation, we need to have a package of things we'd like to see. We're not going to get them all. We want to hold the line on the chain CPI, on the chain. We need a positive vision of what we want. And one of the problems is we've been playing defense for a long time. And we also have to have a vision of where we want to go and what the system can do. And some of it is small and additive. Ted Deutsch, Mark Begich, Tom Harkins, Bernie Sanders, a number of other members have put forward some benefit expansions in Social Security because they're recognizing the risk that younger people and people in their 50s are facing. One way to attack Social Security is to nibble away at it piece by piece. Dismantle it, raise the retirement age, cut the COLA, do all these things a little at a time. Another way to do it is to undermine the service that the system provides. The Social Security Administration provided world-class service in the past. As I said, you know that the system runs on less than 1% of administrative costs. $1 expended out of every dollar expended in benefit in Social Security, 99% goes to benefits, 1% to administration, a shade less. It actually needs to be spending a little more, but the sequesters will significantly reduce that. There have been budget changes already that have forced a closing of offices in some places, a reduction in hours in all Social Security offices, a half day on Wednesdays at Social Security, as well as shorter work hours. Not that they aren't working. A huge backlog in disability. We made some progress on it, but people who apply for disability, 310 days is the average wait between when they apply and when they hear. Well, 105 days when you first hear it, and then if you appeal, 310 days. The public has already paid for this service for the most part in their Social Security. But if you want to undermine confidence in the system, say it doesn't work, say it's unsustainable, but also nibble away at its administration. And we're seeing that happen. Maybe not by design, but the reality will be it will undermine the system. It also undermines faith in government. Social Security is government at its best in many ways, and so that's something we need to be aware of. There are many changes that need to be made to improve the system. There's some small ones that can be done early on. Student benefits. Now, it used to be that if you lost a parent or if your parent was disabled, you could get a Social Security college benefit or voc ed benefits until age 22. Anyone in this room received those benefits? Yeah, I did, because I lost my father. But if Today, you only get it until age 18. A very small change can be made and should be made that would extend those benefits to age 22. Not expensive. There's some small things we should be pushing in the context of the next Social Security system. But more importantly, we have to keep fighting. We have to reimagine the system. We have to reimagine the vision. We have to lay a foundation for expanding the system, because our private pension system is in disarray. Our savings that Americans have, certainly as they reach, in people in their 50s, they've lost their housing equity in many cases. Many have not had much in the way of wage increases. The one place we can really look to rationally that provides broad protection is Social Security, and the public's willing to pay more for it. So we have to be rethinking how we deliver that message. I think we have to talk about the values. I think we also have to build on this real retirement income crisis we're facing, where the Boston College has this wonderful thing called the National Retirement Risk Index. And it basically, the short story, without going into the details, is that almost 2/3 of working Americans today are not in position with their retirement savings, the benefits they have, they are in Social Security, they're not in a position to maintain their standards of living into retirement. Those are people in their 20s to people in their 60s who are working. And it's assuming that everyone works until age 65. The model assumes working until 65. When you add in healthcare costs, long-term care costs, and the pension needs, you come up to about 65%. That was before the recession. There's more to the story than that, but we face a real problem. The middle class is at risk, not just low-income people, not just high-income. The middle class is at core risk, and this is the kind of system we need to be building on and delivering a message that this kind of use of government is critically important, not just because it provides protection, but because it gives expression to the kind of values our country needs and wants to build on. So let me just end with Claude Pepper again. I started with Claude, and I'll end with him. Claude Pepper said, "Life is like riding a bicycle. You don't fall off until you stop pedaling." That was Mr. Pepper. He did pedal. He didn't fall off. He didn't stop pedaling until he dropped dead. He gave us this system. He passed this on to us, and it's our job, all of us, to make darn sure it's passed on, not just to ourselves, but also to our younger people, because they're going to need it. They may not know it. They need it more than we're going to need it. So I look at Mr. Pepper and I just smile. He was a great man. Thank you.
Questions, comments? Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Yes?
I have a question about all of the noise that's out there about Social Security. One of the things that we find when we're out there talking about the realities of the program is that some of the things you talked about, the myth of the trust fund being empty and the bonds not worth anything, and it seems those individuals have the ear of the American public much more so than those of us who are trying to actually provide accurate information. Do you have any tips on?
Really good point. And again, the numbers are simple. Not simple, but the reality is the system has sufficient funds to meet all obligations till 2033. And then if Congress did nothing, it would have sufficient funds because people are still working and paying into it. It would meet about 3/4 of expected, of anticipated earned benefits. So you still have a system. It's not belly up. You have a system that maintains itself. Obviously, we want to deal with it. The press has been in some ways merciless. Now, I guess the New York Times just came out against the change CPI, so that's wonderful. But the press has echoed the same thing. One of the things we're doing, and this is the coalition that I've co-chair and the group, we have a wonderful group of people who work for Social Security Works. It's 9 people besides Nancy Altman and myself. All of them are under 40. We didn't plan it that way, but it's wonderful to have. We're most proud of having these younger people, most of them in their 20s, who are so committed to the system and so competent. Part of the work we're doing as a coalition and also as an organization, is to try to have more and more influence with the media, to get our message out there, to talk with media, to develop people, not us all alone, but engaging, enabling and developing local leaders who can speak to the media also, people who are concerned. It's a slow process, but it's critical. And so having a media strategy is important. Having a political strategy to build support and support people who are supporting Social Security, punish people in members of Congress who aren't. Get the message out when members are not supporting Social Security, thank them when they are, identify and develop new champions on Social Security. Terribly important. It shouldn't just be Democrats, but right now, Democrats should not be reticent to talk proudly about this system, but neither should Republicans, because it's really a bipartisan, it's an American system that really works. We're not ashamed, we shouldn't be ashamed of it, but we need to get those champions out there and support them. We need to build coalition as a core part of this as well. And we need good policy information and research. Not just the research is critical, and turning that research into policy relevant information is terribly important too. And so it's a multi-pronged effort that needs to be done, and it needs to be done over time, because it isn't all at once, but everything matters. And the strong suit we have, as I said, is the thing that Nancy Altman always says: the American people are on the side of this program. The more we can bring their voice into it, the more support we have for building it. We also need this positive vision of where we would like it to go. Would we like student benefits? Would we like to be thinking about benefits at the birth of a child? Or the adoption of a child? That's not unusual in the world. Are there ways of emphasizing the cross-generational benefits, but also providing support for families and for caregiving? It's so important. So those are some, but what are your ideas? I guess I'd just say add, or others, if there are thoughts, please feel free to add. We don't have the answer. We have some ideas. Yes, sir?
So are other kind of industrialized democracies, large pension systems, having similar problems now with funding their pension systems?
Jill, do you want to?
No, I think every country is facing similar issues that we have, organizations taking different forms and places, but there have been some big changes in some countries like Sweden.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but the Economist magazine 2 weeks ago had a section on the Nordic economies, and this is conservative neoliberal magazine. But they make a strong case for the effectiveness of the Nordic economy, including their retirement security systems, which have become more financially sound over the last 10 years than anything in this country or the rest of Europe. And they've done it through a combination of the defined benefit, defined contribution plan, including a notional Social Security system. But they replace over 80% of the last wage through their public Social Security system that Eric was talking about. We replace about 40%. So they have a much more generous system, and it's actually in sounder shape economically than ours at this point across those 600.
Isn't that based on the history of higher taxes, probably?
Oh, yes.
It's acceptable, and an understanding that there's a broader understanding of the role of government. But here's the number. Average replacement rates are actually even lower than around 40%. But as you get on, when you start playing with Medicare costs are increasing and they come out of the check, effective replacement rates are really dropping around about 32% for the middle group. Effective replacement rates for high-income people will drop. Well, the replacement rates are dropping even lower, but for lower-income people, it replaces more. We're way down on this scale, is what you can see. Yes.
I don't know, I thought you were saying that there's a lot of misinformation out there in the media about the truth about Social Security. But what I hear out of the media is exactly what you had on your other slide up there, that we'll hit this shortfall if we don't do something about Social Security. And I hear that from all aspects of the media. So that is true, isn't it?
It is, if, what's true, that if we,
That we will be fully funded until about the year 2033, and then through 2087, we'll be able to pay about 3/4 of the benefit.
that's correct, if Congress did nothing.
Okay, so the real question is, something needs to be done.
Yes, but the other, there's no, yeah, something needs to be done, but we're not dealing with crisis. But if you want to, it's a good point. Let me just say something. It also makes me a little proud that you're hearing that, because we are working, and we is a broad we, everyone from Alliance for Retired Americans, ARP, National Committee, AFL-CIO has been stellar to try to reframe the discussion. So this notion that you're not hearing that it's going belly up in 2033 is great. I still think there are plenty of folks out there reporting it that way, but absolutely correct. There is a projected shortfall. The public was given a few choices and packages in the National Academy of Social Insurance's recent poll. It was done by Greenwald and Company, Greenwald and Associates. They were asked, would you find acceptable some changes like eliminating the cap? If you eliminate the Social Security cap, if those who earn above $113,700 paid the same Social Security as every tax rate as everyone else, that would address today about 80%, depending how you did it, 85% of the projected shortfall. That's not a crisis. So that's not a crisis. If you, and this is what the public went for, if you added 50 cents a week to Social Security, pay roughly, gradually over 20 years, increase the contribution of working people by about 50 cents a week on average, that would not only address the problem along with raising the cap, it would provide a lot of opportunity to strengthen the benefit structure. So, but no one's presenting those choices publicly. So, yes, it has to be addressed. 1982, to go back to it, we had a long-term shortfall that's roughly similar to what we have today, projected. But we also had a shortfall in the short run. If Congress didn't act in 1983 early on, Social Security by law would have had to reduce its benefits. And now that's a crisis, especially for members of Congress, because they don't want to be in their offices when benefits are reduced one day. So that was an action-forcing event. We don't have an action-forcing event today, but if you want to pull the system apart a little bit by bit, you try to create this sense of crisis, to build that momentum. You try to find a vehicle to do it outside the normal congressional order, because when it goes through Congress, it sees the light of the public sees the discussion, and it becomes much harder to cut it back. So, yes, there is a shortfall. We need to address it. It's far from a crisis.
And I will agree with that. Now, to get to my question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Since we agree that that's correct, and that's exactly what I'm hearing through the media. Something needs to change. I guess the real question is, well, what actually needs to change? I take it that you're a proponent of put more in, don't change any benefits, expand benefits.
No.
What we need to change is reduce benefits, reduce eligibility, and that way you'll make it a sustainable program. Now, you mentioned that one of the things would be no cap. So that's essentially someone pays a proportion of whatever they make.
It's like the Buffett.
You'll also be a proponent then of that their benefit goes up substantially?
You know what Congressman Deutsch has done from Florida? That's a really good question, because historically we've always related benefits to contributions in. That's part of the insurance feature of the system. Personally, I really like what Congressman Deutsch, if you ask me what I would do, I'll tell you what, it's a little different, but I like what Congressman Deutsch has proposed, because yes, benefits are increased. So, but very modestly though, when you get above a certain level, the increases for each dollar of contribution is significantly less, but yes, you maintain that contribution.
So you would want to,
I would actually.
suggesting increasing significantly the tax on the
Yeah.
more wealthy.
Actually, I'll tell you what I would do. It's not, I do what Jimmy Carter wanted to do. Ever hear of Jimmy Carter? I would eliminate the cap on employers. I would say to employers, you are welcome to pay whatever you want to baseball players, to corporate leaders, to whomever's, but high wages require, you also are welcome and need to pay the Social Security payroll contributions for them. I would leave it on the employee for the same reason you said, but I would raise it a bit to be back up to where it was in 1983, where it covered 90% of 90% of earnings. That would address about 65, 2/3 of the problem, the projected problem. So I would do that. I'd raise taxes in 2040 a little bit, and then again in 2060. I don't think that's a horrible thing to do. There are a lot of ways to do it. So, but I think your point is very well taken, because if you scrap the so-called cap, eliminate it, and you don't provide some benefit back, you do change the nature of the system. And that's the kind of discussion I'd love to see us have, by the way. Not should we have a benefit formula that slowly over time turns it into a flat benefit, and a flat benefit, almost a flat benefit that's at the level the benefit is for low-income people today, which is what Bowles Simpson very courageously do, and the press does not report. And so, yes.
You mentioned the scare tactic of linking or bundling Social Security to the country's other severe fiscal challenges or problems. How immune is it from the near-term, quote, crises, unquote, of sequestration, funding of government, and debt ceiling? Are these really completely isolated as you see them, or are there relationships there that are never developed?
And it's broadly, I don't mean Social Security Works, but the coalition and others got Simpson, Bowles, and the proponents of including Social Security as a cause of the federal deficit. We got them to say, "You're right, it doesn't cause it." But then they said in the next breath, "But we think we ought to fix it anyway." And I get a little cynical. I think of it as we want to fix it the way we fixed our male dog or something. But it's they want to fix it. They want to put it in its, and it is not immune from the politics. The president has kept putting forward in negotiations with Speaker Boehner. He was the one who put on the table a willingness to cut Social Security by changing the COLA. He won't call it a cut, it's a technical fix, but it's a cut. He also put on the idea of cutting Medicare by raising the age to 67. He would be willing to accept that as the price of fixing this. I have my own gut on the president is that I think we have a good man in the White House, decent guy who has bought the young versus old arguments. He sincerely wants to make investments to move the country forward, to improve the economic standing of children, especially low-income children. And what he's faced with is he has this belief that his advisors and others have said, to do that, you got to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. We can't do everything. No discussion about defense, no discussion about really putting higher taxes on high-income people. I think during the Eisenhower years, the marginal tax rate at one point was up around 80% in the income tax. Now, I'm not suggesting that, but we are not a poor nation. And so, I think we've accepted this bounded kind of thinking that you have to rob Peter to pay Paul. And that's the liberal side of the well-intentioned liberal side is, we got to cut Social Security if today's old so we can do something for kids. Well, it's a very limited kind of thinking.
I was thinking specifically, a week from tomorrow.
A week from tomorrow, okay.
Are there administrative costs related to Social Security that are going to be
Yes.
because of that? So
Yes, and it's going to mean closing of offices. It's going to mean furloughing of Social Security employees. It's going to significantly affect the administration. The numbers I don't have in my head, but I have in my briefcase. I can show. Not benefits, no. But the other thing is that there's a lot of political pressure to go. And I think we're going to see, and the storyline is, we're probably not going to see a grand bargain before March 1st. We're going to probably see a sequester, and we're going to start seeing the pain. The Democrats believe the Republicans are going to pay the pain, and are talking, well, for not willing to deal with corporate jets, the tax deduction on corporate jets. The trade-off is that 10,000 kids come out of Head Start because we're not willing. And so they're talking about it in terms of trade-offs. The Republicans actually believe that the president's going to pay the price. If you look at the news today, it's his sequester. His agreement, it's like, and they echo the language and again and again and again. They think the president's going to have to say uncle. We've already given at the office, we gave some small tax increase, so-called tax increase in the last minute in December. What will likely happen is there are going to be a series of small deals that might go through. The Democrats have put a proposal forward. It's not going to go through, which would raise some significant revenues, about $54 billion or something over the next couple of months, and also cut farm subsidies, and together deal with that sort of the idea they put forward. We're going to limp along, and then pressure is going to build up, and the opportunity, as that pressure builds up, there's going to be real concern to see if there's some of us would say, just forget the sequester. We're dealing with a recessed economy still. This is not the thing to do. Austerity didn't work for Spain. It's not working for Greece. It hasn't worked for around the country. You don't do austerity at this point. Forget it. Others are going to say, we can't let, the other arguments are, what we need is this grand bargain again. And when that happens, and if it happens, as we're going to need to fight the cost of living adjustment being thrown into the Social Security discussion. It keeps being thrown in because it's the briar patch that the White House is quite willing to be thrown into. I don't want to do this, but we have to do it. So there's a lot at stake there, and there's also at stake, of course, huge services to at all levels of government. Ben, sorry.
Yeah, focus back on the question of protecting Social Security from the attacks and proposals of the chain CPI, privatization, and all those other things that would damage the current system. There's a couple of suggestions I'd like to make. One is the people who are defending Social Security should put forth and agree on a specific set of things, the small changes, percentages, how much, when. Make a list of acceptable things and publish it, support it, speak about it, put it out there so it's visible. The second thing is, in the defense of current Social Security program, don't suggest expanding Social Security benefits. All you're doing is giving the opposition ammunition to sink your boat.
It's a good point. Yeah, and I would say part of it is it's two pronged. One is I think doing exactly what you said, although it's very difficult when in our coalition. Well, there are packages out there. The women's organizations in particular have put some very good packages together with Center for Community Change and others, and we're involved. It's very easy to come up with modest package. It's difficult to get everyone to agree with it, and what happens in the interest group, pulling it together among progressive groups, you get this huge package. Everyone gets their piece in, and it may not be very functional. But the idea of having a positive set of proposals is important. In fact, Senator Begich and Harkin, and I think Sanders too, and also I think Congressman Deutsch, I think all of them have been bringing their proposals together more so that there is something to organize around that are really modest. What Deutsch does is Deutsch simply addresses the shortfall by scrapping the cap, and he addresses CPIE, and I think he has he addresses the CPI problem by improving the way we calculate the cost of living adjustment. There's a Bureau of Labor Statistics measure called the CPI elderly households. It's experimental. It actually would have provided larger benefit increases since 1982, when it's projected back to. So they're talking about, the bottom line is, I think you're right. I think we ought to be talking, with the CPI, nobody wants to over or understate inflation in theory. We want the right measure. So we need to be talking about assessing and identifying the right measure for people with disabilities. And
Does your organization have such a list?
we've put a list out that others have used. It's not we were not able to agree totally when we put this package together. Labor had this view, the labor representatives had a view, the women's organizations had a view, number of things, and so what we ended up doing was working with the women's groups and a number of groups who were very critical, and they put together a package. And our view was kind of let 1,000 flowers bloom. But I think, and we worked very closely with Mr. Begich and Mr. Harkin's offices and Mr. Sanders' office and Mr. Deutsch's office. So I think your point's correct. You need a positive.
Why don't you get everybody's list and put it together in a little brochure and say, they favor this, these people.
It's a good idea.
Here are the options. If you go to politics and just say, don't do, you're gonna lose.
Mm-hmm.
Because what do?
Yeah. It's interesting.
The option in front of us, so we either do it or don't do it, so we're doing it.
I'm going to mention someone who like Claude Pepper, I have the deepest affection and respect for, and knew better, Bob Ball. And Jill knew Bob Ball very well. Bob was Commissioner of Social Security. There are two buildings named after people at the Social Security Administration. The Altmeyer Building, who was the first commissioner, or chair of the board then, and Bob Ball Building, Robert M. Ball Building. I was really depressed in the 1994 commission at one point, and I called Bob up and I whined a bit. I said, Bob, and I just said, this is really, just this blocking, just trying to do all this stuff, it's really horrible. Because we would talk with Bob and give him information, and Bob said to me something I say to all my students sometimes, or say mostly. He said, Eric, I've spent most of my life trying to prevent bad things from happening. And that's just as important as making good things happen. Periodically we get a chance to do the good things, but the blocking is important. So that's sort of a lesson for me, but I agree with you. Part of blocking is having a vision of where you want to go, but also getting there. You want to have that vision, and you want to have improvements along the way. And there are things that can be done. There are improvements that can be made in Social Security in the next round of legislation, and we should be talking about that.
Two-part question. One, the Social Security Administration runs the disability portion. And I've seen data where it's going to run out of money on that section in, I think, the year 2017.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And how's that funded? And if it is not replenished, how is it going to be funded?
Okay. Here, you're right on target.
And
Let
me finish the second part of it. The trust fund consists of U.S. paper issued by the Treasury Department, which they pay interest on. Your data says 2021, where apparently we'll start sucking that trust fund down.
Correct.
And that means the federal government's got to go borrow the money to support that and make distribution payments. So it will contribute, if we don't get additional tax revenue some way, to the deficit spending of the government. So the trust fund sort of becomes, in my mind, somewhat of an illusion. Because the government spent the money already.
Is your bank account an illusion? Because your bank has spent the money.
In some
Several
ways.
times over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you still, it's not your fault when you go to the bank and say, I want $5,000.
Yeah.
You're not,
Too many of us go to the bank and
Right.
ask for $5,000.
No.
They'll end up going under.
no, but the point I'm trying to make
They
is,
run on the bank.
this isn't a problem with Social Security. I mean, they want to insinuate it as, it's really, Social Security has support, yes, the debt, I mean, the debt is bought by Social Security,
Absolutely.
and it receives each
As
year,
by the
as you
Chinese
said,
or anybody else.
instead of being, but it receives $115 billion in interest that gets credited to the trust funds. But you are correct, it's kind of a slippery piece, and I'll acknowledge that, but the logic is such that, really, it's not Social Security. Now, most of the public, and this is something in our polling we did early on. Polling was marvelous, by the way. I've learned so much. Polling I thought was just a lot of baloney. Well, you really need polling in Washington because members really want to know if they're going to be doing something that gives them cheers or whatever. Our polling showed, and everyone's polling shows, that Republican, Democrat, Independent, people do not want to cut Social Security. Union household or Tea Party household, not Tea Party leaders, but Tea Party household, they don't want to cut. 70% respond, don't cut it. And that, because it does work. Now, but it also showed that the public believes the trust funds have been raided. They've been stolen. If everything would be fine if the government just gave the money back. Not true, but they believe it. And that one of the strongest political argument back then we could make is keep government from raiding the trust funds further. We didn't use that argument because we didn't agree.
fundamental principle is still that is U.S. debt that's sitting in the trust fund
Right.
is held as a security.
And it's the same debt that China buys, that,
Exactly.
so
So when we need extra funds and there is funds necessary beyond the
Yeah.
tax revenue that comes in, we have to go and say to them, oh, here, Treasury, please give me cash for this debt.
yeah. Mhm.
And so that means the Treasury, which is then probably not gonna have sufficient income based on our projection of debt, they've gotta go out in the marketplace then and raise cash to replenish that debt and pay it to the Social Security Administration to hand it to Larry.
There's a piece of that, but it's also true that we can afford to. I mean, it's not the system here.
Question.
But let me go back to your first point. Which is about the disability trust fund. We will hear it's a potential action-forcing event, even though it's a non-event. We have always had these little transfers. Hear what I'm saying? It's a non-event. We've always had little transfers between OASI and disability. They're two separate funds: the Old Age Survivors Insurance Trust Fund and the Disability Insurance. We talk about it as the Unified OASDI Trust Fund. If you want to say 2017 is the date, the drop dead date on disability, well then you have to say 2036 is really the drop dead date on social credit. It's not a drop dead date in either case, but the DI trust fund DI is going to be used, I believe, by those who want to try to force action as the next the crisis. If we get past this period, we're going to be battling the arguments on DI. Plus the arguments are going to be those folks on DI, they're all a bunch of malingerers. And the truth is, yeah, we all know someone who's a malingerer, but we also know 3 or 4 people who aren't, who couldn't get DI benefits. It's basically a core system that's protecting, but we like to scapegoat people. So we're going to see that discussion coming up. You hear it also, the analytics, or the argument, the Disability Insurance Trust Fund applications have increased greatly in the numbers of people. Damn straight they have. That's what happens in a recession. That's also what happens when you get a large cohort moving into age 50 and 55, prime disability rates. It's also what happens if people have more incentive not to take the reduced early retirement benefit as the retirement age increases and cuts their early retirement benefit. Yeah, people apply for disability, and that's not because they're malingerers, it's because,
But the question is, they fund that then by moving funds from the old age portion
Mhm.
over to the disability.
right, well, that's historically what we've always done, and that,
Just roll money over there.
yeah, which is why we say it's 2033. There's a date where there's a short,
2036.
yeah. Yeah, but, but it's a good point, and I think that's in the politics of Social Security.
Well, Social Security took some hammering because, like, the judge in Huntington, West Virginia, which you're probably familiar with, was granting 100% of all cases.
Mhm.
No, people didn't have to appear, didn't have to do anything, they just showed up, the lawyer showed them the paper, signed it, and they got
Mhm.
hammered on that with a lot of public bad press, if you want to call it, because they had to tighten up their administration process,
Yeah.
overlooking that program.
Right.
Some of the people that were selecting, that were being the judges under their.
Yeah, I mean, we can go around on that one. It's like the 1980 Disability Act or 81. We had this extraordinary tightening of the disability rolls, which resulted in many of the governors refusing to apply the standards because they were very tight, resulted in suicides, and basically there was a liberalization after that.
Has the elimination of the earnings limit on people who are eligible at full Social Security age,
Mhm.
being able to work full-time and have no offset, had any significant impact on that?
Impact on the trust funds, or yeah, I mean, it's a battle. It's sort of old. It's the cheese has been moved, and it's not worth going back to. But many of us would have said there was a reason for an earnings limit. It was because the system replaces lost wages, and if you didn't lose wages, right, you shouldn't be replacing it at that point. Others would say we want to encourage work. We want to create work incentives in Social Security. That's why we have the delayed retirement credit. That's why we've made those changes there. By and large, those changes help people like us much more. Middle class people, upper middle class professionals help us much more than it does lower income people. They don't have as much of a choice on that. It's not going to be changed. It's not. I say that. I thought it was bad policy.
Would you be in favor of means testing, further means testing?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's means tested. I absolutely would not be, but I understand the feeling. Because when I first got into Social Security studies, I thought, this is an inequitable system. Gosh, those rich people get the benefits. And, I'm a creature of the 60s, and I thought that was, bad stuff. And the reality is, I remember this also from the 1994 commission. That was always something that they were kind of interested. Why wouldn't we want a means test? So the staff might talk about it, and the argument they say, well, it's political. Well, a lot of issues here. Firstly, I don't call providing a proportionately larger benefit for people who work long and hard at low wages means testing, and I don't call treating Social Security as taxable income means testing. I actually think it's not a bad tax policy. But I know people like to do it. I call a means test when you set up an age, you set up a dollar amount, and you say, we're going to reduce benefits at those amounts. The interesting thing on means testing is, one, you have to start means testing around $40,000 income to even gain anything that saves the system much. I showed you this number here. There's just not a lot of income. I'm going the wrong way. It's an easy way to do it. There's not a lot of income at the high ends. And by and large, we don't think of $60,000 as rich people. When we talk about tax policy, we're saying $250,000 isn't rich people. We have to go to $500,000 a year to say that's high income. Get to Social Security, they start talking about means testing if they want rich people who are $40,000, $50,000. So if you want to get a few bucks to reduce the deficit, the shortfall that's projected, you have to go way down. That's one reason. A second reason is, what's your name? Who asked me? Harry? You're a saver. I'm a spender. I spent my whole life spending, and I enjoy it. And I get to old age, you have a lot of money in the bank, and you get a nice, not only do you get Social Security, you also get some interest on your savings. Me, not me. I just spent it all, I get my Social Security. You get penalized for having saved. I get a reward for not having saved. So that's a conservative argument in a sense. What? Moral hazard. But beyond it, I think it undermines the concept of the system, that you do get something back for the contribution you make. You have a right to it, just like any insurance. It is social, it adjusts. You work long and hard at high wages, you get a larger benefit. You work long and hard at low and moderate wages, you get a proportionately larger benefit. It's risk against working long and hard at lower wages. You work hard at higher wages, you probably have some other tax advantages. So it's not perfect, but so I think it undermines the politics. You end up doing that, and I remember, you end up doing that, and you end up the politicians who make more, the journalists, whatever love's left of them, who make more, soon the bloggers who make more. But you lose the constituency for the system. You also undermine the dignity of people, because this is an earned benefit, and we like the idea that we've contributed into it and we have a right to the benefit. So it's a complex issue. So I've gone from being think this is an inequitable system to thinking it's a pretty darn good system. It's not perfect. You can pick it apart in all sorts of ways. But by God, it's working, and we need to keep it that way.
Okay, any more questions or comments? This is a very good conversation. Let me just mention one thing. It seems to me that the Republicans are in an extremely vulnerable position on the Social Security and Medicare. They have, to me, after watching this about as long as you, Eric, and other people in this room, 40, 50 years, I'm astonished by how hostile they are to Social Security and Medicare when you have all the data, some of which you mentioned today, indicating that this is a 75% supported program by the public. But the Republican Congress people and their presidential candidates feel as if they are free to be openly hostile to these programs in a historically unprecedented way for the last 5, 6, 7 years possibly, maybe going back to President Bush's privatization proposal. And the thing I'm curious about is given that vulnerability, why hasn't the president or the Democratic leadership moved to seal the deal by isolating them in their tremendous hostility to these programs, rather than blurring the distinction by offering to make a deal cutting the programs? Because the Republicans took great advantage of the president's cut in the Medicare program as part of the ACA back in 2010, cut it by $700+ billion. That was their #1 run commercial in the 2010 elections. But then they come back since then, and even at the same time, and express this great hostility and the necessity to cut these programs. So I'm really curious, because it seems to me as if the one sure way the Democrats could increase the number of white people who vote for them, which is at historical lows now, about 39% in the last election, is to take a strong stand on retirement security. Because a lot of white people out there, the baby boomers and somewhat younger, are really worried about what's going to happen to them when they reach 65. And they're going to be poor and needing health care, and they're going to be destitute in a way that they didn't even imagine 20 years ago. They're really vulnerable in this issue, and the Democrats are failing to take advantage of it. It does appear to be a kind of political malpractice.
I think it is too. I mean, we were involved at a very low level in the 2008 campaign. I was involved, as was Nancy Altman, as were a number of people. We were on a retirement income advisory group, all volunteer. And it was as if there was a glass ceiling on aging. It was really interesting. We kept saying to the campaign, and we even got it up to Axelrod, I think, but look, the president does not have the candidate doesn't have a lot of support among white older people. Among African American older people, massive support, strong support. Put a few white people with gray hair behind the candidate occasionally. That was sort of part of just the imagery. Make some visits. There was this one time he had intergenerational meeting, which was in Iowa. That really was a great idea. High school students and older people heard the arguments, and we thought it was a natural because there's a need for a different message in aging than I think of Monsignor Charles Fahey, who's another person in the field of aging who, frankly, has the national cachet that Jill, Larry have. Chuck Fahey would say, the dignity of old people requires that you expect them to contribute, that you ask and you acknowledge the contribution. I kept thinking through the campaign, the president was the ideal candidate in many ways. Raised by grandparents, a interracial, intercultural candidate, member who, in many ways, the quintessential American, fused many things, and Grandma was going to be in the White House. And here it was, the great opportunity to really talk about a different notion on aging. He just wasn't there. And I don't know why, and we've kept saying it. The White House, we presented to them the White House, well, the candidate, the campaign website had almost every group. Jews for Obama, former Jews for Obama, fallen Catholics for Obama, real Catholics for Obama, you name it, these groups were there. No seniors for Obama. Really, it was like there were about 25, 30 groups. We would point that out. Seniors were listed, they were listed under issues. Seniors and Social Security. It was really, I view it as an implicit kind of ageism. And that stayed on the White House website until maybe a few months ago. The White House website might still be that. We brought that up to them so many times. Donna Butts from Generations United, and we kept bringing it up. Seniors are not an issue, and Social Security is not just about old people. It's really most fundamentally about people throughout their lives. And so but that's sort of a mindset, and does it have something to do with, I think we have the potential of a realignment similar to the 1930s, democratic realignment, and with or without the old, by the way, with or without us old white guys. Basically, there's rising populations, Asian, African American.
It's not going to happen without a greater percentage of whites, of whatever age.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm just stunned that I've said it. I mean, I think there's been almost a decathecting in psychodynamic terms from the old, and it's unfortunate, short-sighted, and we've seen it, and maybe it'll change. I think it's part of it is the way I rationalize it is I think we do have a good man in the White House, and I think he buys the young versus old. He doesn't want to harm old people, but he's never really done well in white older constituencies, and he's cast his lot in a certain way, and he wants to be able to invest in young people, in an economy, and he buys robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it's a real bad mistake.
He needs to take the FDR approach, who never felt that any group was beyond his reach.
Yep.
There's a constant effort. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.